The sheriff whipped the boy who stole his horse until he found a letter signed by his dead wife. The sun came up like it always did, slow and orange over the dusty streets of Cedar Ridge. But something was wrong. Sheriff Tom Brennan knew at the moment his boots hit the wooden porch of the jail. The hitching post stood empty where his bay mare should have been waiting, her reins hanging loose like broken promises. Tom's jaw tightened. In 23 years of wearing the badge, nobody had been fool enough to steal his horse. The bay mare wasn't just transportation. She was trust, routine, the one thing in his life that never let him down. Not like people did. Not like promises did. He walked to the post and picked up the dangling leather reins. They were still warm from the night, still held the smell of his mare's neck. Whoever took her couldn't have gotten far. Cedar Ridge sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of hard ground and harder men. A horse thief wouldn't last long out there, especially not with Tom's reputation riding behind them like a storm cloud. Sheriff Brennan? Tom turned to find Mrs. Henderson from the general store hurrying across the street, her face pinched with worry. Her gray hair had come loose from its pins, and her apron bore the stains of early morning flour. "They brought in a boy about an hour ago," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Jimmy Peterson caught him trying to water your mare down by Miller's Creek." "The child's hurt, Sheriff." "Hurt bad." Tom's eyes narrowed. "Where is he now?" "Cell number 2. Doc Williams looked him over, said he'd been riding hard for days. Hasn't eaten much either by the look of him." Mrs. Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper. "He can't be more than 12 years old." Tom nodded once and walked into the jail. The building smelled of old coffee, tobacco, and something else, fear, maybe, or desperation. It was a smell he'd grown used to over the years. The smell of people who'd run out of choices. Cell number 2 sat at the back of the narrow hallway. Tom approached slowly, his spurs clicking against the wooden floor like a clock counting down to judgment. Inside the cell, a small figure sat hunched on the cot, back pressed against the stone wall. The boy looked up when Tom's shadow fell across the bars. His face was dirt-streaked and hollow, marked with cuts and bruises that spoke of a hard journey. But his eyes, those eyes burned with something Tom recognized. Defiance. The kind that came from having nothing left to lose. "You took my horse," Tom said. It wasn't a question. The boy said nothing, just stared at Tom with those fierce blue eyes, chin raised like he was ready to take whatever came next. Tom pulled out his keys and unlocked the cell door. It swung open with a rusty groan. The boy didn't move, didn't even flinch. Just watched Tom with the stillness of a cornered animal. "Stand up," Tom said. The boy stood, though Tom could see it cost him. His legs shook, and one hand pressed against his ribs like he was holding something broken in place. He was small for his age, all sharp angles and hollow spaces where meat should have been. His clothes, what was left of them, hung like rags on a scarecrow. "What's your name?" Tom asked. Silence. "I asked you a question, boy." More silence. The child's mouth stayed pressed in a hard line, like words were another thing he couldn't afford to give away. Tom reached for his belt and pulled out the leather strap he kept coiled there. It was old and worn smooth from use, darker in some places where it had seen harder work. The boy's eyes followed the movement, but he didn't step back, didn't beg or cry or promise to be good. Just stood there ready. "Horse theft's a hanging offense in these parts," Tom said, letting the leather uncoil in his hands. "But seeing as you're just a child, I might be inclined toward mercy. If you start talking." The boy's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek, the only sign he'd heard Tom at all. Tom felt something twist in his chest. Anger, maybe, or disappointment. He'd expected tears by now, or pleading. Children usually broke fast when they saw the strap. But this one stood like he'd been broken so many times before that one more beating couldn't possibly matter. "Turn around," Tom said. The boy turned. His shirt was already torn, and through the holes Tom could see old scars, white lines against sunburned skin. Someone had beaten this child before, and recently. The sight should have satisfied Tom, should have confirmed that the boy deserved whatever was coming. Instead, it made him pause. "Put your hands against the wall." The boy obeyed, placing his small palms flat against the stone. His shoulders trembled. Not from fear, Tom realized, but from exhaustion. From the bone-deep tiredness that came from running too far, too fast, for too long. Tom raised the strap. The leather felt heavy in his hand, heavier than it ever had before. He'd used it on grown men who'd caused trouble, on drifters who'd pushed their luck too far. But never on a child. Never on someone so small they barely cast a shadow. The boy waited. His breathing was steady, controlled, like he'd learned long ago that showing fear only made things worse. Tom held the strap in the air, ready to bring it down. But something stopped him, something about the way the boy held himself, the familiar set of his shoulders, the stubborn angle of his head. It reminded Tom of someone, though he couldn't place who. The morning light shifted through the small window, falling across the boy's face in a way that made Tom's breath catch. For just a moment, in the golden dust motes dancing between them, the child looked like someone Tom had known, someone he'd loved. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Sarah, his wife, standing in their kitchen 3 winters past, her hand pressed to her belly where their child should have grown. The sadness in her eyes when she told him the doctor's news. The way she'd whispered that maybe God had other plans for them, other ways to be parents. Tom lowered the strap. The boy didn't move, still pressed against the wall like he was waiting for pain that hadn't come yet. "Boy," Tom said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Look at me." The child turned slowly, those blue eyes wide with something that might have been surprise. Or hope. Or maybe just confusion at why the punishment had stopped before it started. Tom stared at the boy's face, trying to understand why it felt so familiar, why looking at him made Tom's chest tight with unnamed emotion. The child stared back, and for a moment the jail cell fell away, and it was just 2 people looking at each other across a distance neither of them quite understood. Something passed between them in that look, something Tom couldn't name but felt in his bones. A recognition, maybe, or a question that hadn't been asked yet. The boy's lips parted like he might speak, but then footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, and the moment broke like morning frost under boot heels. The footsteps belonged to Deputy Martinez, his thick boots announcing his presence before he appeared in the doorway. Tom stepped back from the boy, coiling the unused strap and hanging it on his belt. The moment between him and the child had passed, but something of it lingered in the air like smoke from a dying fire. "Sheriff," Martinez said, touching the brim of his hat. "Found something you ought to see." Tom followed his deputy back toward the front office, leaving the boy standing alone in the cell. But he could feel those blue eyes watching him go, could sense the child's confusion at being left without punishment or explanation. On Tom's desk lay the boy's belongings. What few there were. A torn coat that had once been brown, but now looked the color of dust and hardship. A pair of boots with holes worn clean through the soles. A small cloth bundle that held nothing but dried bread crusts and a piece of jerky hard as leather. "That's all he had?" Tom asked. Martinez nodded. "Traveling light. But there's this." He pointed to a bulge in the coat pocket. "Didn't want to go through his things without you present." Tom picked up the coat. It was lighter than air, worn thin from use and weather. His fingers found the pocket and felt something crinkle inside. Paper, folded small and kept close. He pulled it out carefully, as if it might crumble at his touch. The paper was yellowed and soft from being handled, creased from being opened and read many times. Tom unfolded it slowly, and his world stopped turning. The handwriting was unmistakable. Every curve, every slant, every careful loop of the letters. He knew them like he knew his own heartbeat. Sarah's handwriting, as clear and careful as if she'd written it yesterday instead of years ago when she was still breathing, still laughing, still filling their small house with warmth. Tom's hand shook as he read. "My dearest Tom, if you are reading this, then young Samuel has found his way to you at last. I pray you will not be angry with me for keeping secrets, but some promises are too important to share, even with the man you love most in all the world. 3 months passed, a woman came to our door. Her name was Mary Dalton, and she was dying. The fever had taken hold of her, and she knew her time was short. She carried with her a boy, her nephew Samuel, orphaned when his parents died of the same sickness that claimed his aunt. Tom, I looked into that child's eyes and saw such loneliness, such fear. Mary begged me to help, to promise that if anything happened to her, Samuel would not be left alone in the world. How could I turn away a dying woman's plea? How could I look at that frightened boy and say no? I promised her, Tom. I gave my word that Samuel would have a place with us if he needed one. I meant to tell you, truly I did. But then my own sickness came so fast, and there was no time for explanations. Only time for this letter, written in haste and hidden away for the day it might be needed. Samuel carries this letter as proof of my promise. He is a good boy, Tom, though the world has been hard to him. He has traveled far to find you, guided only by the stories I told him about the kind sheriff in Cedar Ridge who always kept his word. Please do not be angry with him for taking your horse. A child alone in the world must do what he can to survive. And please do not be angry with me for binding you to a promise you never made. I know your heart, my love. I know you will do what is right. Take care of Samuel as you would have cared for our own child, had God blessed us with one. Love him as I would have loved him, with the fierce protection of a parent's heart. He needs someone to believe in him, to see the good man he can become. I am sorry to ask this of you from beyond the grave, but I could think of no one else in this world I would trust with such a precious responsibility. You are a good man, Tom Brennan, the best man I have ever known. And I believe that Samuel will be blessed to know you, just as I was blessed every day of our marriage. All my love, always and forever. Sarah. Tom read the letter twice, then a third time, each word hitting him like a physical blow. His legs felt weak, and he sank in his chair, the paper trembling in his hands. Martinez cleared his throat softly. Sheriff? Everything all right? Tom couldn't answer. The office around him seemed to blur and shift, memories flooding back with the force of a flash flood. Sarah in their kitchen, always feeding someone, a drifter, a neighbor fallen on hard times, anyone who looked hungry. Sarah with her hands pressed to her empty belly, whispering about the children they would never have. Sarah in her final days, feverish and rambling about promises and responsibility, words he'd thought were just the sickness talking. But she hadn't been rambling. She'd been trying to tell him about Samuel. The boy, Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. His name is Samuel. Samuel what? Martinez asked. Tom looked down at the letter again, searching for a last name, but found none. Samuel was all Sarah had written, all the identification the boy carried besides his hunger and his determination to find the man his aunt had promised would care for him. Just Samuel, Tom said. He folded the letter carefully, as if it were made of butterfly wings instead of paper. Then he walked back to the cell where Samuel waited. The child had sat down on the narrow cot, his head resting against the stone wall. His eyes were closed, but Tom could tell he wasn't sleeping, just resting, gathering strength for whatever came next. Samuel, Tom said quietly. The boy's eyes opened immediately, alert and wary. That's your name, isn't it? Samuel. For the first time since Tom had laid eyes on him, the child's careful mask slipped. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been hope or fear. Sometimes the two looked exactly the same. Samuel nodded once, a small movement that seemed to cost him everything he had left. Tom held up the letter, and the boy's eyes fixed on it immediately. You've been carrying this a long time. Another nod. How long have you been looking for me? Samuel's lips parted, and Tom thought he might finally speak. But instead, the boy's face crumpled, and he pressed his hands to his eyes as if he could hold back the tears by force alone. Tom felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built around his heart after Sarah died. Here was this child, this Samuel, who had traveled who knows how far to find the man Sarah had promised would care for him. And Tom's first instinct had been to reach for the whip. Samuel, Tom said again, and this time his voice was gentle. How long since you've had a real meal? The question seemed to undo whatever strength the boy had left. His thin shoulders began to shake, and when he looked up at Tom, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. But he still didn't speak, still held his words like they were coins he couldn't afford to spend. And Tom realized that whatever had happened to this child in the time since his aunt died, It had taught him that silence was safer than trust, that keeping quiet might be the difference between survival and something worse. Tom looked at the letter in his hands one more time, seeing Sarah's careful script, feeling the weight of her promise settling around his shoulders like a blanket he'd never asked for but somehow needed. Tom stood in the doorway of the cell, Sarah's letter still clutched in his hand, watching Samuel try to hold himself together. The boy's thin frame shook with the effort of keeping his tears inside, and Tom felt something twist in his gut. Guilt, maybe, or shame at how close he'd come to using the strap on a child who'd already suffered enough. "Samuel," Tom said, stepping into the cell, "when did you last eat a proper meal?" The boy looked up at him, those blue eyes wide with wariness. His mouth open like he might answer, then closed again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of mistrust and hunger. Tom crouched down so he was at eye level with the child. Up close, he could see how young Samuel really was, 12 at most, maybe younger. His face was all sharp angles where it should have been round with childhood. His skin was burned dark by the sun, marked with cuts and scratches that spoke of sleeping rough, of traveling through country that didn't care if a boy lived or died. "I'm not going to hurt you," Tom said quietly. "I give you my word." Samuel's eyes flickered to the whip hanging from Tom's belt, then back to his face. The boy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin neck. 3 days, Samuel whispered, his voice so soft Tom almost missed it. Maybe 4. Hard to remember. The words hit Tom like a fist to the chest. 4 days without food, and still the boy had been strong enough to steal a horse and ride it 20 miles before getting caught. For days, and he'd never once begged or cried or asked for mercy. "Jesus," Tom breathed. He stood and walked to the cell door, then called out to Martinez. "Deputy, go over to Martha's kitchen and get a plate of whatever she's got cooking. And some milk if she has it." "Right away, Sheriff," came the reply, followed by the sound of boots heading for the door. Tom turned back to Samuel, who was watching him with something like confusion on his face, as if kindness was a language he'd forgotten how to understand. "You've been carrying that letter a long time," Tom said. Samuel nodded. His hand went unconsciously to his coat pocket, as if checking to make sure the letter was still there. "How long since your aunt died?" 2 months, Samuel said, his voice a little stronger now. "Maybe 3. Time gets mixed up when you're walking." "You walked here? From where?" "Started in Kansas. Then Missouri. Then..." Samuel's face scrunched up in concentration. "Lots of places. People kept telling me Cedar Ridge was further than I thought." Tom felt his chest tighten. The boy had walked hundreds of miles, alone, carrying nothing but a letter and a promise that might not have been kept. He'd slept in fields and barns, begged for scraps, done whatever it took to survive long enough to find the man Sarah had told him about. "Why didn't you just show me the letter from the start?" Tom asked. Samuel looked down at his hands. "Aunt Mary said. She said grown folks don't always keep promises, even when they write them down. She said I should be careful, should make sure you were the kind of man who..." He trailed off. "The kind of man who what? Who'd want me around?" The simple honesty of it nearly broke Tom's heart. Here was this child who'd traveled across half the country on the strength of a dead woman's promise, and he'd been afraid that Tom might not want him, that the man Sarah had chosen might turn him away. Tom sat down on the cot beside Samuel, close enough to feel the boy's warmth, but not so close as to make him nervous. "Tell me about your Aunt Mary." Samuel's face softened slightly. "She was kind, like your wife must have been. When Mama and Papa died, she took me in even though she didn't have much. Taught me to read and write and figure numbers. Said education was the one thing nobody could take from you. Sounds like a good woman. She was sick for a long time before she died. The fever came and went, came and went. Near the end, she kept talking about finding you. Said your wife had promised. Said you'd honor that promise because you were a good man." Samuel looked up at Tom with those piercing blue eyes. "She said your wife told her you'd lost a baby once, that you'd understand what it meant to lose someone you loved." Tom felt the air leave his lungs. Sarah had shared that with a dying stranger, their most private grief, their deepest wound. But of course she had. That was Sarah, always giving pieces of herself to help others heal. She was right. Tom said quietly. We did lose a baby. Before it was born. Sarah, she never got over it. Always said God must have other plans for us. They sat in silence for a moment, two people bound together by loss and the ghost of a woman who'd believed in second chances. What happened after your aunt died? Tom asked. Samuel's face went hard again. The neighbors came. Said they'd take me to the orphanage in Topeka. But I heard them talking when they thought I wasn't listening. Said the orphanage was full, that they'd probably just turn me out on the street anyway. He shrugged, trying to look like it didn't matter. So I ran, took Aunt Mary's letter, and started walking. And you've been walking ever since. Mostly. Got rides sometimes when people were feeling charitable. Worked for food when I could find work. Did what I had to do to keep moving. Tom thought about the old scars he'd seen on Samuel's back, and his jaw clenched. People hurt you along the way. Samuel's shoulders tensed. Some people don't like it when you can't pay for food, or when you sleep in their barn without asking. But I learned to run fast, and to sleep light. The matter-of-fact way Samuel said it made Tom's hands curl into fists. This child had been beaten, probably more than once, by adults who should have helped him instead of hurt him. And through it all, he'd kept walking, kept believing in Sarah's promise. Footsteps in the hallway announced Martinez's return. The deputy appeared with a plate piled high with beef stew and cornbread, steam rising from the food like an offering to the gods of hunger. Martha sent extra, Martinez said, setting the plate on the small table by the window. Said any boy skinny as this one needs feeding up. Tom took the plate and handed it to Samuel, whose eyes went wide at the sight of so much food. The boy's hand shook as he took it, and for a moment Tom thought he might cry again. Go on, Tom said gently. Eat. Samuel ate like he was afraid someone might take the food away, shoveling spoonfuls into his mouth without stopping to taste or breathe. Tom watched him, remembering Sarah's voice reading from the letter. Take care of Samuel as you would have cared for our own child. Samuel, Tom said when the boy had slowed down enough to listen. Your Aunt Mary. Did she tell you anything else about my wife? About what kind of person she was? Samuel nodded, swallowing a mouthful of stew. Said she was the kindest woman she'd ever met. Said she had a way of seeing the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Said she'd have made a wonderful mother. Tom felt tears prick at his eyes. She would have. She had so much love to give and nowhere to put it after. He stopped, unable to finish. After the baby died, Samuel said quietly, Aunt Mary told me. Said that's why your wife made the promise. Said she saw me and thought maybe God was giving her a chance to be a mother after all, even if it wasn't the way she'd planned. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Tom looked at Samuel, really looked at him, and saw not a horse thief or a burden, but a boy who'd walked across the country carrying nothing but hope and a dead woman's promise. A boy who needed someone to believe in him, to give him a chance to become the man he could be. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe this was God's plan all along, to bring them together through loss, to heal two broken hearts with the same medicine. Tom reached out slowly and put his hand on Samuel's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch away this time, just looked up at Tom with those blue eyes full of questions and carefully guarded hope. Samuel, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion he'd kept buried for too long, how would you feel about staying in Cedar Ridge for a while? Samuel's eyes widened at Tom's question about staying in Cedar Ridge. For a long moment, he just stared, a spoonful of stew halfway to his mouth, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. You mean it? Samuel whispered. You'd really let me stay? Tom felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he hadn't felt since Sarah died. I gave my word to your aunt through my wife's promise. And a promise is a promise, especially one made by Sarah Brennan. Samuel set down his spoon with careful precision, his thin hands trembling. I don't have nowhere else to go, he said quietly. But I don't want to be trouble. I can work. I can earn my keep. I'm sure you can, Tom said. But first, you need to get some meat on your bones and some rest in your belly. The rest we'll figure out as we go. The boy nodded, then returned to his food with slightly less desperation than before. Tom watched him eat, thinking about the empty house that waited for him each night, the silence that had grown so heavy he'd started sleeping in the jail just to avoid it. Maybe Sarah had been right about God's plans being different than their own. Maybe this boy, this Samuel who'd walked across half the country carrying nothing but hope, was exactly what they both needed. "Sheriff." Martinez appeared in the doorway again. "Sorry to interrupt, but folks are starting to ask questions. Word's gotten out about the horse thief, and they want to know what you're planning to do with him." Tom stood, his hand instinctively moving to the whip on his belt. Then he stopped, really looked at it for the first time in years. The leather was old and worn, dark in places where it had drawn blood from men who'd crossed the line. He'd carried it as a symbol of his authority, his ability to keep order in a place where order was often the only thing between life and death. But looking at Samuel, still eating with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to waste food, Tom realized the whip represented something else entirely. Fear. The kind of justice that came from anger instead of understanding, that solved nothing and only created more pain. "Tell them," Tom said, unbuckling the whip from his belt, "that the matter has been resolved." He walked to the small stove in the corner of the jail, where a few coals still glowed from the morning's fire. Without ceremony, he opened the iron door and tossed the whip inside. The leather caught immediately, curling and blackening as the flames consumed it. Samuel looked up from his plate, watching the whip burn with something like wonder on his face. "Why?" the boy asked. Tom thought about that for a moment. "Because some tools are meant for building, and others are meant for tearing down. I reckon I've done enough tearing down for one lifetime." The flames crackled, and the smell of burning leather filled the small space. Tom felt a weight lift from his shoulders, one he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. "Come on," Tom said, turning back to Samuel. "Let's get you cleaned up and figure out where you're going to sleep tonight." An hour later, they walked together through the dusty streets of Cedar Ridge, Samuel's face scrubbed clean and his torn clothes replaced with some spare things Tom kept at the jail. The boy was still thin as a fence post, but he walked straighter now, with something like confidence in his step. People stared as they passed. Tom could feel their curiosity, their questions about why the horse thief was walking free instead of swinging from a rope. Let them wonder. He'd answer their questions when he was ready, and not before. "That's Martha's kitchen," Tom said, pointing to a small building with smoke rising from its chimney. "She's the one who cooked your dinner. Good woman. Lost her own boy in the war, so she's got a soft spot for children who need looking after." Samuel nodded, taking in every detail of the town that might become his home. His eyes were bright and alert, no longer dulled by hunger and exhaustion. "And that's Peterson's stable," Tom continued. "Well, they brought you after Jimmy caught you with my mare. Jimmy's all right, just does his job. No harm in him." They reached the edge of town, where Tom's small house sat surrounded by a wooden fence that needed mending. The garden that Sarah had loved was overgrown with weeds, the fruit trees heavy with unpicked apples that would soon rot on the ground. "This is where you lived with your wife?" Samuel asked. "Still do, I suppose, though it hasn't felt much like home since she passed." They stood at the gate, looking at the house where Tom had shared 3 years of married happiness before fever took Sarah away. The windows were dark, the porch empty of the rocking chairs where they used to sit in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. "She'd have liked you," Tom said suddenly. "Sarah, I mean. She had a way with strays and broken things. Always bringing home birds with hurt wings, feeding cats that showed up hungry. She'd have taken one look at you and started planning how to fatten you up." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then, "I wish I could have met her." "So do I, son. So do I." The words slipped out without Tom thinking about it, and both of them went still. So, such a small word to carry so much weight, so much possibility. Samuel looked up at Tom with those blue eyes that seemed older than they should be. "Did you just—" "Yeah," Tom said. "I guess I did." They walked up the path to the house, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves that no one had bothered to sweep. Tom opened the door and led Samuel inside, into rooms that smelled of dust and loneliness. "It's not much," Tom said, looking around at the simple furniture, the cold fireplace, the kitchen where dirty dishes sat unwashed from his last attempt at cooking for himself. but it's got a good roof and walls that keep the wind out. There's a spare room where you can sleep, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." Samuel walked through the house slowly, touching things gently as if they might break. He stopped at the mantelpiece where a photograph of Sarah sat in a silver frame, her smile frozen in time. "She was beautiful," Samuel said softly. "Inside and out," Tom agreed. "She'd have been proud of you, making that journey all by yourself. Proud of your courage." "I wasn't brave," Samuel said. "I was scared most of the time." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Tom said. "It means you do what needs doing even when you are scared. And you did what needed doing, didn't you? You kept your aunt's letter safe. You kept walking when any sensible person would have given up. You found your way to me against all odds. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard of." Samuel's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't try to hide them this time. They were good tears, the kind that came from relief and hope instead of pain. "What happens now?" Samuel asked. Tom looked around the house that had felt like a tomb for the past 3 years, seeing it suddenly through new eyes. The spare room that could be fixed up for a boy. The kitchen that could use someone to help cook meals and wash dishes. The garden that could be planted again, tended with care. "Now," Tom said, "we figure out how to be a family." That evening, they sat together on the front porch as the sun set over Cedar Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Tom's bay mare stood in the small corral behind the house, contentedly eating hay, her theft forgiven and forgotten. Samuel had cleaned up well. With his face washed and proper clothes on his back, he looked like what he'd always been underneath the dirt and desperation. Just a boy who needed someone to care about him. "Tom," Samuel said, the name still careful and new in his mouth. "Yeah. Thank you. For not using the whip. For believing the letter. For," he gestured at the house, the sunset, the simple fact of sitting somewhere he didn't have to run from. "For all of it." Tom nodded, feeling Sarah's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. She'd known, somehow, that this boy would find his way to him. She'd arranged it all from beyond the grave, bringing together two broken pieces that fit together better than either had dared hope. "Thank you," Tom said quietly, "for not giving up, for walking all that way to find me, for giving me a reason to come home at night." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, two souls no longer alone in the world, watching the day fade into night and feeling, for the first time in longer than either could remember, that tomorrow might bring something good. In the distance, a coyote howled, but it didn't sound lonely anymore, just wild and free, singing its song to the endless sky.